Welcome to the Bird's Eye View. This series is not meant to be a political or cultural commentary, nor is it a nitpick or comprehensive review. What we will be doing is diving into entertainment to try to understand its message, how well it accomplishes this, what we can learn from it, and how it might be improved. So let's look into it. In this video, we're going to take a look into what we can learn from Batman Begins. First, let's recap what the strengths and weaknesses of Batman Begins actually is. The biggest strength is its overall coherence. It's held together so well, the themes and message come together with the characters and the plot very well in lots of different ways, from the symbolism all the way to the reuse of lines that they do. However, it ultimately defeats itself, or it hurts its own message, because in the end, Batman stays Batman despite the theme ending up leading to a place where he should have just let Batman go as a vestige of who Ra's al Ghul was, instead embracing Thomas Wayne's legacy and going towards his side of things rather than Ra's al Ghul. So now that we understand the strengths and weaknesses, or we have a brief summary, if you want more, just check out my last video. But now that we have that, let's look into what we can learn from the writing and the quality of it first. On the positive end of things, the lesson we can learn is to echo the core struggle, the core theme, throughout multiple different layers. Now, on the opposite side of things, on the bad end, what we can learn from how I think Batman Begins fails is not to undermine your themes with how you conclude things, with how you end things. So in that case, it would be how Batman stays Batman. How, rather than using Thomas Wayne's legacy, rather than using the tools he used, he instead decides to go on using the tools that Ra's used. And that undermines the overall theme. However, on the positive side, let's talk about that for a minute. He does such a great job, Christopher Nolan does such an excellent job of making the theme so coherent. What does that mean? It means bringing it together, bringing all of these disparate elements together. One element is the symbolism. Like I talked about in the last video, you can see the difference in the symbolism throughout. How it begins the movie with Bruce Wayne falling into the well, and Thomas Wayne coming to rescue him, to bring him out of the well, to give him a second chance. And then he uses that line, just like we talked about. He reuses that line, "Why do we fall?" And again, it sets up this great symbolism between the conceptions of justice, or the conceptions of harmony, of balance, that Thomas Wayne has versus Ra's, where Ra's, on the other hand, you have to come up to his level. He's at a mountaintop. You have to come up to his level, rather than someone coming to him, right? Like Thomas Wayne. Thomas Wayne came to Bruce when he was at his lowest point, while Ra's, on the other hand, Ra's demanded that Bruce come up to him.
Tomorrow you will be released.
If you are bored of brawling with petty thieves and want to achieve something,
There is a rare blue flower that grows on the eastern slopes. Pick one of these flowers. If you can carry it to the top of the mountain, you may find what you were looking for in the first place.
To grab the flower and then to ascend the mountain. And that was how they were able to make their connection in their relationship. So it shows this great difference between their conceptions of justice, of acceptance, and of mercy. People ought to come up to Ra's level, versus Thomas, on the other hand, goes to them and gives them a second chance. And symbolism like that does a great job of making the whole movie coherent as a whole, like a line, like several lines point in the same direction, all impacting the same point, like a dartboard, like you've seen in the past with Daredevil, where Daredevil would throw one thing and then he'd throw another, or Hawkeye would do the same thing. They all would hit the same point. And that's the idea of coherence. You can also see that not just in the symbolism, but in the use of lines. We would have different characters comment on the same ideas, but in different phrasings and in different ways of saying it. Or, at times, even verbatim, repeating the same lines we've heard earlier.
Bruce, deep down you may still be that same great kid you used to be. It's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you. At least tell me your name.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Bruce?
And that does a great job, like I said, of this idea of coherence, of coming at the same topic through multiple different layers. And we also see this quite explicitly when it comes to Bruce. Bruce talks about his struggle, and he talks about his ideas, and that he wants to use his anger. Another great scene to demonstrate this is when the two of them are just finished training on the ice sheet, and they discuss their ideas of vengeance and anger and how it's boiling inside of Bruce. And Bruce asks Raish, how did he deal with that? And Raish then says that he used vengeance to help him deal with that. So we get to see in these little areas how overall the themes are echoed across these different layers, across these different ways and times. And that is one of the excellent ways that we can learn from this when we are writing something or when we're thinking about something. If you understand your theme, if you understand what you're trying to say, then throughout it, it is a lot easier to align the different layers of your story, whether that be symbolism, the quotes that your characters are saying, or what they believe and move toward their actions throughout the story. You can bring them into line to all agree and be saying the same thing at the end. And so that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about writing and improving stories. Now, on the opposite end of things, when we're talking about improving, one of the issues, though, is when you paint yourself into a corner. And that's what Christopher Nolan did. He took on this Batman project and wrote the whole story in a way that, in my opinion, leads logically to him giving up the cape and cowl, to him saying, I'm done. I realize that this is Raish talking, that this is Raish acting. When I'm Batman, this is something I learned from Raish. I didn't learn this from Thomas. I didn't learn this from who he was or what he wanted or the legacy that he's left. He wasn't Batman. The closest thing to Batman in this movie, aside from Batman, is Raish. And so, to me, it was leading up to him letting it go. But of course, you cannot do that in a Batman movie. You can't. So, Christopher Nolan effectively painted himself into a corner. And that's something we, as writers or as thinkers, when we're trying to analyze a project, have to realize that sometimes the very premise puts you in a certain place. If your premise is the idea that Spider-Man got bitten by a spider, that Peter Parker got bitten by a spider and now he has superpowers, you can't necessarily end that with all of a sudden it being about something completely different. Or another way to say it is you're not going to have just one movie where there's Spider-Man. You're not going to end it with just one movie. There's clearly going to be other movies. There's clearly going to be other things in the work with something like that. So you cannot end it where he simply gives up at the end or he takes away his powers. That's something that's almost implied by the subject itself. And yet, I don't feel Christopher Nolan took that fully into account. Because the entire story, in my view, was leading toward him giving up. Toward him accepting that acting like his father and taking that mantle up was more effective to help the people of Gotham. So the lesson we can take away from this is to begin with the end in mind. Know how you're going to end things, or at least the general direction, the parameters that you're going to end in. So if you know that that's your goal, then you know you can't end it in certain ways, that certain ways are off limits, you just can't do it. And therefore, when you're starting the beginning of the story, you don't paint yourself into a corner, ending towards an aspect, towards this end goal that you don't want to be, that you can't be. And so you have to wrap it up in a strange way, in a way that doesn't make sense. That is why it's important to begin with the end in mind. So now that we've talked about that, what can we learn from a human standpoint? And that is, what can we learn from the moral of this story, from what it is trying to say, just as people? Well, I think the big point it's trying to get at in this, and there are other points too, but the most important one is vengeance and justice are very different. They are very different. And we need to realize within ourselves, when we're angry about some injustice, some wrong that happened to us, what position are we coming from? Are we coming from a position of revenge, just like the beginning when it comes to Bruce? Are we coming from a place where anger fuels us toward vengeance, toward hurting others simply because we feel poorly? Or is it coming from a place like Thomas, a place of wanting to help people rise up from where they're at? Where is that place coming from, and what are we doing with that? And that's something that we watch throughout this movie. We watch as Bruce struggles with that. He first learns from his own experience that vengeance is the answer and that's what he should do. And then when he realizes that his understanding is not good enough, or what he tries to do is he tries to simply gain more understanding of how to use his vengeance. And that is exactly the arc that Ra's al Ghul went on himself. And that's what he talks about, that vengeance has kept him alive. And he likes to use his understanding, his elevated point of view, to make himself seem like he's greater than he is, like he's doing something for a greater good. Like here he's looked on this organization, the League of Shadows, as some noble enterprise helping to bring justice to the world for cosmic balance sake. But the truth is that he is just a man who has been wronged. And that wrong has made him angry, and he's used that anger in service of vengeance.
But I know the rage that drives you. That impossible anger strangling the grief until the memory of your loved one is just poison in your veins. And one day you catch yourself wishing the person you loved had never existed. So you'd be spared your pain. Your anger gives you great power. But if you let it will destroy you. As it almost did me.
What stopped it?
Vengeance.
And just like what Rachel says, that is not good. It's not worthwhile. It's not for other people. It's not for the sake of harmony. It's not real justice. And that's what we've had to learn throughout this. We need to learn personally ourselves. When we're wronged, where do we come from? Do we come from a place of justice? And if so, that might mean forgiveness. It might mean like Thomas does, where he goes and he helps the person up. He gives them a second chance. That's commonly what justice looks like. Because a lot of people, they struggle. They're afraid and they make mistakes. And that's part of this, is the way that fear plays on us, the way that it impacts us, and the mistakes we make because of fear, because of anger and because of fear. And part of what Bruce had to learn throughout this entire thing is how to use his anger and how to use his fear in a positive direction. And that's what we have to learn as well. And when we see others that don't use fear and don't use anger in a positive way, then we have to think to ourselves, are we coming at things from a place of harmony and balance, a place of justice, one that comes from kindness and giving people a second chance, or are we coming at it from a place of vengeance, revenge, and anger? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. Are we the Bruce before or the Bruce after? And that struggle, that inward struggle, is what this movie is about. And I think there's a great deal that we personally can learn from it. Now, this last lesson I think we can learn is interesting. I call it the lesson that they were really saying, or the lesson that they actually said. And that is, sometimes in a movie or TV, they're trying to say one message. They're trying to tell you one thing, and yet the way that they go about it undermines it and changes what the message really is. And in this, I think they were going for that vengeance versus justice idea, and yet in the end, it has the commentary of, yes, but at the same time, you can use the methods of people who are unjust in service of justice. You can use their methods, and it's okay. And it's all right in the end, as long as you use them for noble ends. Because, in fact, Batman obviously operates outside of the law and uses Ra's al Ghul's methods against criminals. So, in actuality, the message changes. It gets tweaked. That sure, you should not choose vengeance over justice, but you can still use the methods of those who choose that. People like Ra's al Ghul. You can use those methods for good cause. And that's where I think it makes a mistake. But in effect, that is what I think, in reality, the message really is when you look at it in a whole. This has been a look into Batman Begins and what we can learn from Batman Begins. Next time we'll take a look into how we can fix it, or how can we look at the problems and try to improve them. I'll see you then.